prepared this message all week, and then the last couple of days I was listening to more, trying to get a little more information, and they just changed my thought of how I was going to talk about today's text. And so I'm going to be scrambling from, and I couldn't put that together in my head, put it on paper, and that on paper, and this on my head. So I'm just going to kind of wing things here. But I want to start out first talking about, on the text here today, you see that Jesus had pity on the people. And, but that turned into eventually what he had was compassion for the people. He wanted to feed them. Now, on a key thing you want to notice there, that if you have pity on something, on someone, on something, you have a thought. When you turn that pity into compassion, that took an action. You're doing something with your pity. So that's the difference between the two. Compassion is action. You're doing something. So I want to start off with a little bit of, and it'll hopefully tie together. I did it in the first service, I think. Anyway, years ago, I had a handyman business in this town, and Leland Paulson, a great friend of many of you here, many of you never met him, member of our church since he was probably a baby. Is that right? He was born and died on the same exact spot down on the farm. And anyway, he would call me to do a little handyman work at his place. And I think part of it is that he probably could do it, but he just liked people, and he wanted to be around people. And he just I said, well, I can't really compete with just Leland on his stories. So I brought Lemoyne every time. And we'd have to go in there and over here, have some coffee, some coconuts. And many of you know that his voice was like that, kind of. I don't do it justice completely. So we went in there. One time we were fixing his automatic chair that lifted him out of to stand him up. It was broken. I had to screw the parts out. I had my battery drill, and the battery went dead. So Lemoyne, you go down to my truck and get a battery. Well, Lemoyne brings back the charger and two other batteries to make sure we were covered. So he plugs it in, and we put the charger on there. Leland standing back there, he always watched. And I told him, I said, you watch stuff? Anyway, so he watched, and all of a sudden he comes back and says, well, that's really something, he says. You go and charge all your batteries with my electricity. So every time we'd ever go there, I'd pick up the wine and we'd bring the batteries in. What we're going to do, we'd plug them all in, and he got a little chocolate. So hopefully that'll tie into at the end here. But I just want to tell you a little story about our beloved Leland. So today's lesson is demonstrates a miracle that Jesus performed. He performed many of them, of course. And this one was apparently a pretty important one that all four books of the Gospel, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, do depict this message. And so it's commonly called the feeding of the 5,000, but if you really want to break that down, in reality, they mentioned 5,000 men, but it was a crowd. It wasn't just the men that went and followed and wanted to hear teachings from Jesus and wanted to be possibly healed and a prayer and answered by them. But also the women and children would go along. So there would have been another 5,000 women and probably two children per couple maybe. There could have been up to 20,000 people on this realistically. So now you're going to take 5 loaves and 2 fish and try to feed these. Well, there's another thing to notice, that Jesus doesn't just do miracles to show off. He does it to make a point. And I think in the long run, we all need to look to him and look to that we're all going to need him at one point. We all do. You got problems at one time or another got to wonder, how can I get help? Well, there he is. So we need to listen to this message because actually part of this message has 4 lessons to it. And so the first lesson of it is that you got to ask for help. God will listen to you when you ask. Others pray for you. You know that. You know that's true, so we pray for others. But He will really listen when you ask Him, I really need your help. So that's when He listens the best. He listens all the time, by the way. But why don't we do that? Do we procrastinate? Well, it'll handle itself. Maybe we think we're bigger than the problem, or we put it off. There's really no need for that. The disciples, they wanted to pass the buck. They wanted to say, well, let's not deal with these people. Let's send them home. That's not our problem. But they kept putting it off. But it wasn't easy to do. What were they going to do? And there's not McDonald's or Burger King where they could just go and get food. And Jesus didn't want to see that. Here's where it comes. Not only did He have pity, but He had compassion. So, but they were, the disciples were actually worried about, well, how are we going to do this? You want us to spend 200 silver coins, which I think was reading remember one part of it, it was like 8 months' wages, maybe at that time, for just to have, to feed that many people. And it would have been more. So we might fret, we might stew, we might get anxious, and that's what the disciples did. But so they asked Jesus, send them away, but how are we going to feed them? So Jesus put it back on them. You feed them. Now, when would they go? So they asked him then, well, how are we going to find this? Well, so the second thing is, he says, well, how much food do you have? So that's the second thing that I remember. What do you have that you can contribute for your prayer, that you're praying for your need? Well, they went out, and it says, it was in the book of John, it says it was a young boy that they found. The young boy had, in his knapsack, he had 5 loaves of bread, and they probably were small, tiny pieces of bread, and 2 fish, probably small, very small sardine-like fish or whatever. And how was this going to happen? This is so little. And but the boy was willing to give that up. The only thing he had out there. Probably much less than many others had. But he willingly gave that up and didn't put up a fuss. And the disciples still were wondering, well, how is this going to happen? And it's kind of throughout the Bible, you see that the disciples many, many times questioned Jesus' motive, his motives. How are you going to calm the storm? We're in this boat that time. And the waves are coming up on us. And this is Jesus that's standing next to them. But they always do that. But is it in the Bible how when they wrote these, that they're also make a point that it got to you in that matter, that Jesus can handle this. Jesus, like I said, he's standing next to him. He's the one that healed the sick. He's the one that made blind people see. He's the one that made the lame people walk and dance. And yet they question him. So, the next thing is, the principle of it, the giving of the bread, was give to God what you already have. So that goes across there. That still goes today. Give your talents. I could say this, the pastor probably shouldn't, is give your money to the church. That's between you and the Lord. Give your time. Another thing is, we're talking about compassion, like we did about food. Give your time. It's a compassion that he shares his jokes to lighten up the leader's life a little bit. And in turn, we bring our batteries in. Lighten up his life a little bit. That's compassion. That's God's love coming through you. And that's easy. Now the giver probably don't feel that as much as the person receiving it. And they probably don't feel it right away, but it's there. So the boy gives his little light lunch. And Jesus broke it and gave it to the disciples to feed them. And not only did they feed all 5 to 20,000, whatever the number interprets to be, they had 12 baskets of leftovers for themselves. So look at all this coming from 5 loaves and 2 fish. It's to the last lesson. Whatever you give, God always gives back more. So the boy gave it up willingly. He knew in his heart. Jesus knew what all was going to happen. He did this all to make a point. He knew that there was only going to be a little bit of food, but he knew how he could make it more. So when we give, we step out in faith. God always takes whatever you give and multiplies it. He always does that. He doesn't work in your life unless you ask him. He always starts with what you have and uses whatever you give him. And whatever you do give, he gives back more. But the reason you see this happening in the story was that way is that Jesus could have just had the loaves rain down from the sky. But then he wouldn't have made his point. He would have had something to teach. And he made this to a point. So, getting back to, that was the 4 points that I tried to come up with during the week. And get back to the compassion part. So, get back to the Leland story. I hope you can hear this. Lemoyne was your part. And earlier in the day, in the first service, Bob Campion was here. And he lives just down the road from where Leland used to live. And Lemoyne, he was a great friend of Leland's. And Lemoyne and I are going to come up and see Leland one last time. He was not doing well anymore. And we went up there to see him. And he was in a wheelchair, rolling up to the kitchen table. A little trouble breathing. And I said, Lemoyne, come on, let's go back to the truck. We did. I said, pick up those batteries. And the charger. We brought back, we had armfuls, and we put them on that counter. We plugged it in, we put the batteries on, we turned and looked, and Leland is laughing. What a day. Remember that, don't you, Lemoyne? Yeah. Right there. That was God's love. He poured out as he did to us every time we were there. what's in our hearts. We all do that, one way or the other. We may not see it as much as givers of it, but we do see that, acknowledge that when you're a receiver of that, and thank God for that. Whether it's happening all the time, whether, and years ago I was in a car accident, a terrible one, and from the ambulance people to the doctors, the surgeons, the therapists afterwards, people bringing food over. They didn't know it, but they were sharing the compassion for me. And a lot of people probably had a pity of one sort, but they turned it into compassion. They probably didn't know that was what they did. Boy, when I felt that, I didn't notice it at the moment, but when I had time to reflect on it, the warmth was just overwhelming. Coming into me, my heart was filled. That's what the Lord's compassion is about, and that's what we need to share. Thank you very much for listening to me today. Amen.